Here's our footbox. We've got it all fitted. I'm really happy with it. I ended up going through and making a recessed access panel to it. Now when I put some nut certs in there, I have a panel so I can remove it. I can adjust to get to the pedals and adjust them, and it doesn't sit up there, so if somebody touches it or anything, they're going to get caught on it. It's not going to catch any material or any rubber. It's just going to be nice and smooth flowing because it's got that recess to it. Now on all my edges I went through and spaced out my welds, and I've got these weld knobs here, and one easy way that I've found to go ahead and knock those down is I take my little grinder. I like using the small grinder because using one of my big ones it's just hard to manipulate and hold on to. Using these smaller ones it's a lot easier to finesse, knock those down, and ultimately you have just a better product. I've seen other people go through and they'll just hit it with a grinder and just and smooth it all out, but what they'll do is they'll remove material down here in the middle of these welds, and then it's just got this big lumpiness to it. And rather than doing that, I'll take my grinder and I'll get down there and I'll knock down each individual weld until it's smooth, and this way you have a nice even plane with some tack welds that hold everything together. Now we've got a nice smooth flushness to it. There's no rippling because we removed too much material on the sides. All we do is knock down the weld. That's the piece that's sticking up. That's all that we need to knock down, and then you just kind of blend into the panel as you see that I did there. Here's the final product on our footbox. You can see how these edges are nice and sharp. If we just ran a grinder over there, those will be kind of moon-shaped back a little bit, and it just isn't as good of a look. I really like the way this turned out. It looks good and sharp, and yeah, next up, powder coat. Same idea on these ones on this rear panel, this rear firewall. You don't want to go through and knock down this gap in between there. If you just hit it with a grinder, it's just going to smooth out. It may take the tops off these, but it's going to create low spots in between each one. So the goal is to just, like I said before, knock the heads of these welds off without removing any material on the panel. Knock the head off, then blend it in. Another thing I like to do is I'll cut into it and just knock the top of it off. And then when I do my blending, I'll go a different direction to it. This just ensures that it's not just smooth one direction, but it's smooth in both directions. Looks good. Nice and consistent. Super smooth. And by the time it's powder coated, you'll see none of those grind marks. All you're going to see is nice little tack welds. I went ahead and started building this. I started with the front, and I knew how high I wanted it. The biggest thing is making sure that it's high enough to clear your feet. You don't want your feet to be up at the top, rubbing the top panel when you're working the throttle or the brakes. So make sure when you mock it up, you have something in there to replicate your shoe. You got to make sure that you have the brake pedal. I haven't got the throttle pedal mounted just because it mounts into the side here. So that's going to be my next step. But when you're mocking up, start with the front panel. Know your height, know where your width is at. After you get the front panel located, then you can move to the sides. When both sides are done, then you can put the top in. Make sure you leave an access panel because getting to the brake panel, the brake assembly from this side is a real pain. So leave yourself an access panel on the top that can be removed, or make the top to where it's removable. But there you go, there's the footbox. When I started building this, I basically mocked it up and just used some measurements. I started bending material, I put it in. I didn't like my original top piece, so I ended up having to make a second one, but rather than trying to record all that, that's all just tedious editing. I just thought I'd go ahead and finish it out and show you guys what we did here. I think it turned out really good. It's really tight. I'm really happy with it, and yeah, we're ready to go ahead and mount the throttle pedal, make that access panel. After the entire footbox is done, installed, welded, you don't have to have it finished welded and ground, but you have to have the entire footbox in before you can start working on building the tunnel. Your next step after finishing that will be to build this front piece and the tunnel, to the back. After the tunnel is done, then you will build this back firewall. I still have to make this panel on the side here. But we're ready to start building tin work now. A couple things to think about when you're building the tunnel is, first off, you need to know how high your shifter is going to be so that you can make sure that you're high enough here. If this gets built too low, you're going to run into shifter problems, you're going to run into drive shaft problems, even drive shaft hoop problems. There's several things that can be in the way there, so make sure you have your transmission and your engine located before you build this piece, just to know that you've got enough height. Also, when coming off this dash bar down to the tunnel, when you build this panel, there's also a few things that come into factor, like the shifter or the side of the transmission. So having all of that in and mocked up just makes this a little bit easier to ensure that we have proper fitment. We don't have anything in the way. The last thing you want to do is get an engine in this thing and then have to start chopping out panels because you didn't account for something. When I am building my rear firewall, basically you want it to be as low as possible. If this comes up too far before it breaks back, you're going to hold the seat up. You can kind of see I've had the seat in there and the seat's just kind of rubbed on it a little bit. Had this been up any higher, or had I not broke that right at the top of that rail, there could be a potential for me to hold that seat forward. Next thing you know, your knees are bent too far and it's just not comfortable. So make sure you take all that into account when you locate this panel. If your battery sits behind there, locate your battery first, because you don't want your terminals running into the top of this or into the back side of this panel. Make sure you got a good seal all the way around, and then when you build your aluminum, you can butt it up to that and continue it on. I always leave breaks. I try to break all the edges of these panels. One, it builds extra rigidity, and two, it gives me an access to mounting the panel beside it. If this was all just straight edges with no breaks on them, one, it wouldn't have much security or much strength there. Two, it's just going to make it a lot harder to put the next panel on it. Here is that same panel, but a little bit different angle. You can see the break on it, so when I put my next panel up to it, I've got a nice seam there to attach to. I've now got the second back piece, the vertical piece towards the crossbar back here installed. As you can see, that seam is going to be really pretty when we're all finished. I like to hide my rivets so that I don't have a bunch of exposed rivets showing. Obviously these ones are going to show up here, but anytime that I can do a 90-degree break on the ends and make a seam where it looks seamless, you know, obviously you can see a little bit of it, but you don't have all those rivets showing. I just feel like it's a lot cleaner and a lot prettier. So when I built this panel, I had a height, I had a width, and then I had basically an angle versus a height on this end. Now I can build my front panel here that goes in front of the shifter. Then I can build my center panel, and yeah, we'll just keep moving forward. When I've got a chassis that has already had holes drilled in it, as you can see in this one, I don't want to keep drilling more holes every time we replace this tin piece, and without having the tin as a template for building another one, what I'll do to mark these is, first I'll take my narrow tape, my masking tape, and I'll align it with the center of those holes. Now when I lay my next piece over it, I can align my top of my tape with this one, and it'll show me exactly the plane at which those holes are drilled. Now to get a vertical mark, I'll just take my square. It's a little kind of a T-square. It's got this flat on the bottom. When you put it on the bar, it actually centers itself. So you can slide it up to the center of your hole. You can mark that with a pen or something sharp. You don't want to use a sharp because it's just too wide. And you can mark where those holes are at. Now when I put my panel over that, I can align my marks so I know vertically where my hole goes. And then I can lay my tape over that and have a nice little cross section that tells me exactly where my holes are. The problem with just guessing is that I use a lot of 1/8 inch drill or 1/8 inch rivets on my interior. Now if I was just to stick it down there and try to guess it and try to hit that hole, anytime those holes are off just a little bit, you run a really good risk of breaking that drill bit and potentially screwing up your panel if that drill bit breaks and then the drill falls or whatever happens. This is just a lot safer, a lot easier, a lot cleaner, and you reuse these holes so you don't have to keep punching holes in this chassis. Anytime you put a hole in that bar is now weaker. I've seen cars with 50 holes across there where people keep replacing that tin work and they don't try to reuse those holes. One, it's ugly. Two, it's near impossible to try to weld those up and regrind those. I just prefer to do it like this, and it saves me time, and it just makes for a better product at the end. You can see now, after putting our tape on it and using our vertical marks that we had made before, we absolutely nailed those holes. It's simple things like that that make your life a little bit easier when you're fabbing. Like I say, we could have punched a million holes in this thing, but this is the right way to do it, and it worked out perfect. We've now got the front panel in, and we are making some real progress here. I'm ready to start building that centerpiece. Now I got the centerpiece built here. I'm ready to start drilling some of these holes to get these linked together. One quick way that I like to do to make sure that all my rivets are in a line, first thing I'm going to do is measure them out so I know where my spacing is. But then I can throw a piece of tape on there. This ensures that when I drill that hole, etc., that they're all in a level plane. And if you were to sight down them, they're not going to be all wonky. Same thing with up this side. I'll put a piece of tape as well as the back. But yeah, our center tin's coming along. We've got one more panel to build up on the top there. It looks like it's bowed a little bit, but that's just a shadow. It'll be all nice and tight when we get done. But boy, we're killing the tin today. When you're drilling your holes in your tin, like I am right here, make sure that you don't push too hard with your drill. Once that drill cuts through that backside, if you're pushing really hard, wham, you're going to hit that and leave a dent. So let the drill bit do the work. Don't force it. Don't shove it. Just drill nice and light. Here we go. We've got the footbox done, installed, welded. We've got the rear firewall in, and we have the center tin finished up. I'm really happy with the way it turned out. I've still got to do some bead rolling, which I will do before it goes to powder coat, but I'm not really worried about doing it right now. And I'm also going to relieve this entire centerpiece. You can see where it says remove. My reasoning for that is, one, if I make this panel where it just comes out with some cam locks or some Zeus fasteners, I can keep my shifter boot in there, and if I need to work on anything like at the back of the transmission or the shifter or the drive shaft or my center link or my top link, I can pull this panel out and I can access it. If I've got to move lead or if I've got to do any of that stuff, pulling this panel out and having more access to the center of the car is really, really nice. A lot of these, because the lead tray in there and everything, it's really hard to access from the bottom. So I've been doing this recently and I'm really happy with the results from it. But there we go. There's the center tin, and yeah, we're ready to keep moving forward. Thanks for following along. This is probably going to conclude this video, but yeah, progress.